A very warm welcome. My name is Federico Re and this is InspireTalkTV. And in this episode, we are looking at or discussing what social innovation or entrepreneurship is all about. And joining me today is Claire Rogers from World Vision. How are you, Claire?
Great, thanks, Federico. It's lovely to be with you.
It's an absolute honour to have you on the show.
Thank you.
So I guess I really want to dig deep into the ethos and culture of World Vision, and particularly look at how World Vision as an organisation is adapting and innovating and also collaborating with the community, not just here within Australia, but globally in terms of solving global issues. So perhaps my first question to you directly is what inspired you to join World Vision, which I believe started back in November last year?
Thanks, Federico. Yes, the role began last November. Two things really captured my imagination and my heart. The first is the way that people who talked about World Vision, who'd gone to see the work in the field, were changed. You could see it in the way they talked about their experience of going to see our teams changing the face of global poverty out in countries where that people are less fortunate than we are. So you could really see that in the culture, you could see it in the board, and you could see it in the leadership of the organisation. So that was the first thing that really caught my heart. The second thing was the need for this organisation to transform the way we're telling that story to our supporters. And for me, that's all about digital, because digital has this amazing power to bring things up close and personal and very current, compared to perhaps how the industry might have communicated with supporters in the past. And so we talk together as a team. I've been talking to the team about this analogy of a window, because not everyone can go to the field. I know that you've been to the field, Federico, you just shared that experience and it changed you. And so our team's job is to bring the field close to the supporters so they can have that rich experience, because I think giving is a mutual experience. We help people in a difficult context, poverty, famine, conflict, but also it enriches us as people. And so this sense of being close to what happens in the field, feeling empowered to make change happen, feeling like a change maker, is part of our human spirit. We want to do that. And so that was the second thing that really caught my attention in taking the role, was to lead this transformation, to really see digital as a tool to change the relationship between the supporter and the work that they're contributing to.
I like the word, or the use of the word, human spirit, and I know that World Vision is really about a story of faith, hope and love, which is really much centred around the Christian principles. So I guess around the values of World Vision, how do you sort of go out there and provide work throughout the community, throughout the globe in that respect?
Well, faith it's an interesting question that you're asking, because the way Australians think about faith is very different to the way faith is operating in the globe. Around 75% of people in our world have come from a faith tradition or a faith basis, very strong faith basis. So we find that it's really important for us in our development work, because it allows us to go into conversations or go into places that organisations that don't come from that standpoint can't do. So, for example, we have some work happening in Afghanistan and in the Solomon Islands around domestic and gender-based violence. And we're working with faith leaders who are very influential people in those communities. In the case of the Solomon Islands, it's a Christian faith. In the case of Afghanistan, it's a Muslim faith, around the principles of the faith to respect others, to not be engaged in violence. And we're seeing really fundamental transformations in attitudes amongst the leaders in the churches, the leaders in the faith communities, and they're influencing their community members. And so we're seeing really fundamental changes to attitudes, and it's coming from a faith heritage. So in the Solomons, it comes from a position of what the Bible says about how we treat each other, and in particular women. And in the Muslim context, it starts with the Quran. But I think there's this sense of the faith-based leaders understand that as a heritage and are willing to work with us, and they would not necessarily have the same confidence if we didn't have that heritage.
You're obviously dealing with a lot of diversity, a lot of culture difference, a lot of gender difference, and as a business leader, I'm sure that you're always challenged in terms of adapting to the expectations and what needs to happen in order to provide the end outcome. So in terms of adapting and innovating and disrupting and pretty much coping with the demands or expectations that the community or the world has with World Vision, how do you deal with the day-to-day challenges that comes with being a leader in this company?
Are you asking for me personally?
For you personally, yes.
So probably two things. Remembering our purpose and what we're trying to achieve is something that I bring into the office every day. And so the decision making that I'm called upon to do, or the growth of my team and the broader team in terms of what we're wanting to achieve, it always comes back to, is this going to help us extend our work in the field? That's our most important thing. And I think this really came home to me the other day. I was in Uganda, in the largest refugee settlement in the world, and our staff from the Ugandan office are living in tents next to the settlement, doing 14-hour days, processing refugees, helping the kids get into safe contexts. Many kids have come across the border without their parents or have lost their parents in the conflict. And their own families are somewhere else in Uganda and they're only seeing them on the weekend. And it's that passion and commitment that they're bringing to that inspires me to do what I need to do and encourages me to remind the team regularly that what we have to deal with here is not that difficult. There'll be a way to solve it. It's much more important that we are sustaining and growing the work that's happening in the field.
So I read on your profile, your public profile, that you know, the word social innovator does emerge.
Yes.
Around that does come the word adapting and disrupting, challenging the status quo, but also adapting to the tech disrupted economy that we're in.
Yeah.
How do you find the world of philanthropy dealing with that change that's occurring, and how do you as a leader encourage your people to work with that? Yeah.
So there's two things in here. One is how technology can enhance and give us scale in the field. And a really good example of this is some work we've done in Lebanon around creating an education program, digital education program, digital schools program, because many kids in displaced contexts are unable to get to school or their schooling's been broken substantially. And digital capability allows us to provide schooling to kids at scale that wouldn't have been possible in the past. So digital has a key role to play, and we are innovating, and we want to continue to innovate to extend the reach and capability that we have in addressing global poverty. The other side is back, I was talking to you about the window. There's no mistake that windows are made of glass so you can see through them. There's a link there to digital. We need to innovate in the ways that we bring the field to our supporters. And a great example of this is when I was in northern Kenya. We did a Facebook Live feed from northern Kenya, and I was with some of our lead team and a woman from the community, and she was sharing her story. And once we finished that Facebook experience, she shared with us that there was a woman in the Manyata opposite us who had a child with a disability. And as a result of that, we've been able to create a context in which many of our supporters would not have known that story. And so we've been able to share that story more broadly. A little bit later in that morning, we went to a Samburu community in the north of Kenya, and the women had dressed in their full costume, provided me with necklaces and headpieces, and they danced, and they pulled me into their dance. And that is an experience that I will never forget.
So it was a real cultural experience.
So exciting. And just, you know, we had no common language, but, you know, the language of dance was its own language, if you like. And again, we spontaneously posted that on Facebook Live, and it had significant views in the thousands within a few hours. actually tens of thousands within a few hours. And it's just that richness of experience that we can then provide looking through this glass.
So obviously technology has a very important role to play with regards to the communication side, but in terms of the education, you've mentioned schooling. How important is technology in terms of advancing the education for the children out there in the world?
It's a combination of the technology and the community-based leadership. So my example here is from our Indigenous programming along the Gibb River Road in the Kimberleys. Early childhood programming has been made possible through the work of World Vision in that region. Prior to us going into the area, there was no early childhood programming, and the children were arriving at school, and you know that 0 to 5 years is so important for forming them and helping them into the education system. And they were arriving without that, and you know the stats around Indigenous children finishing school is an appalling situation, and so focusing on that 0 to 5 is really important. But what's interesting in here is it's not just the technology, it's the community-based leaders are appointed to run the programming, and we support them to lead it, and that makes it more sustainable and have the longevity that will outlast us in terms of that work. So it is a combination of technology and community-based, the right people with the right heart for that community leading the work.
Great.
And usually from within the community.
With regards to the collaboration side, to what extent is it the responsibility of the government versus the individual versus the private enterprise? So is it all about getting together, helping out? Is that your experience so far in making the best impact globally?
So I think it's everyone's responsibility. I think there's a tendency for the debate in the Australian public domain to be about this is the government's role and this is the personal role. The really interesting space for me is where we can start to get public-private partnerships together, active in the field, because money, whichever way you think about it, money helps get people out of poverty. And there are many different ways to make money work in a poverty context. But there are also huge opportunities. So if I give you an example, you can teach people how to set up a business. Let's take a kitchen garden. That will achieve a certain level of positive outcomes from education. They can afford to send their kids to school. It might reduce stress on the household, so there's less violence in the home, and they're eating healthier vegetables, and maybe there's a little bit of income that they can earn from selling any surplus. That will get you so far, but helping people get into cooperatives in their production of vegetables to then get into a supply chain, which means that money's coming into the area as opposed to money circulating in those communities. That's a much more powerful way to transform a poverty
So
context.
obviously there's a lot of strategy there, there's a lot of innovation there, and I automatically think of entrepreneurship and
Exactly.
How critical is social entrepreneurship in this respect. And you as a leader, do you consider yourself a social entrepreneur, and what impact does that have, generally speaking?
Yeah, so again, two things. One is that we are in the business of encouraging social entrepreneurship in the field, because achieving a livelihood is the way that people can step into or step out of poverty and into exciting opportunities. So we have a lot of programming that's around microfinance, and in fact we're running an innovative program at the moment to look across the microfinance communities in a number of our countries and picking out the ones we think have the potential to really go to the next scale, to go to the next level. Because access to finance doesn't come down. There's this group we call them the missing middle, where the banks won't come down far enough, but they're not a microfinance. They've got the potential to grow and provide jobs for people in their community. So that's one level of innovation and social entrepreneurship. The other side is how we do that here in Australia. And we work with a number of entrepreneurs. I think organisations increasingly, the borders of the organisation are becoming more fluid, and sometimes we'll absorb a social entrepreneur's idea and build something with that. Sometimes we'll run innovation competitions or participate in innovation competitions to really think out of the box and collaborate. And we've just done one with Google and Microsoft around education in refugee camps. So the borders of what is an organisation are changing as well. So there's all these different forms of collaboration to achieve different outcomes.
It's exciting.
And I encourage that.
Great. So looking at the future of philanthropy and the type of work that you do, how do you see that landscape changing, say, over the next 20 years in terms of how collaboration, technology, social entrepreneurship is involved?
I would like to see much more of the public-private partnership activity out in the field. I think we've had a lot of conversation about it. We want things to happen. Intent is good, but actually getting the right parties together at the table at the right time to make, fundamental change is really important. Is more than important. It's starting, but it needs a lot more momentum. So there are some good examples of that, but not many, and we need a lot more. And there's really good economic reasons for doing that. This is not charity. This is about how do we all benefit from participating in these opportunities. The other side is, I think that I want to see, maybe this is more my aspiration for our organisation, but I want to see us build deeper and richer engagement with our supporters, because they're all being change makers. They don't all know it in the same way that I know it from having been to the field. So I'd like to see us really innovate and create a much richer and more high-touch engagement experience with our donors. But that's going to have to change, because at the moment we're still quite paper-based. We're doing a lot on social, but we really need to change the actual experience for our donors. And I think if we can innovate in that, I think it will excite people, and there'll be more and more people, including millennials, who want to get on board, because contrary to a lot of public thought, we know that 75% of millennials really want to make a big difference in the world.
Absolutely.
And have a heart for social equality and fairness in this world. So, I think that's a really interesting space for us to be innovating in.
And it's really interesting to observe your vision of the future, and the common thread or the common word you're using is change. And I know that the millennials are very good at adapting to change. So I think that the vision you paint is very realistic, and I'm looking forward to the outcome in the distant future. So, look, it's been an absolute pleasure meeting you, Claire, and thanks for your insights. And looking forward to seeing World Vision going up to the next level of success.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Federico.
You're welcome.
Great to be here.
Thank you.